It's rookie draft season, so today we're talking wide receivers. When should you take them? Who should you take? And what should you expect? We'll talk landing spots, year one expectations, and where you should draft them in Dynasty. Plus, I'll be releasing my updated Dynasty rookie rankings, all on the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe. On Instagram, you can follow us at the Fantasy First Down. And on Twitter, we're at Fantasy First Down with no O. Today, we're talking about wide receivers. And there's an absolutely bumper wide receiver class this year. We've got some real stud wide receivers most years. And number 3, Rome Odunze would be the best guy. But we've got some superstars in Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors. And they all go to pretty good landing spots. Let's talk about what we should expect in year one. Firstly, in Dynasty, take these guys immediately. Unless it's a super flex league, I would expect all 3 of these guys to go off the board before a quarterback. Unless you're really needing a quarterback, these guys are all going to be studs. Marvin Harrison should be the first guy off the board. He gets an excellent landing spot. He will be the number 1 weapon for Kyler Murray, at least for the next year or two, unless they move on for Kyler. And we know there's nothing else on the depth chart. It's not going to be Wilson or George. It's going to be Harrison getting all the targets along with Trey McBride. They've still got a run game there to open up that space for Harrison. I would expect he's going to get a lot of touches. He's big. He's fast. He can go deep. He's got fantastic hands. He's an excellent route runner. He's great in the red zone. He's good after the catch. He can basically do everything. The draft process wasn't pretty for him, but he goes exactly where he should go at the number 4 spot. He's fantastic value. Do everything you can to get him in Dynasty, even in Superflex. Malik Neighbors isn't far behind him. Neighbors goes to another good landing spot. Daniel Jones isn't Kyler Murray, but he's still a solid option. The reality is that Neighbors is going to be the number 1 option in that offense. They have got a little bit more around him. They've got guys like Robinson, who can do that small slot role. They've brought Hyatt in. We don't know exactly what he's going to do. He hasn't really broken out yet. And they've got Darius Slayton, who's asking for a lot more money than he deserves. So Neighbors is clearly going to be the number 1 option. He's a bit different to Harrison. He's not quite as big, but he's got elite speed. He's still a great route runner. He's got good hands, and he can go deep. Plus, if you get the ball into his hands, he's excellent after the catch. He's still good in the red zone because he's so fast and so explosive. He's another elite option. He easily could have gone at the 4 spot. And if Harrison wasn't there, we'd be talking about an absolute stud wide receiver. For me, in Dynasty leagues, he's probably going off the board 2nd overall. In Superflex, it gets a little bit closer with Williams. But for me, he's still the 2nd guy I'd rather take. It does depend on need a little bit. But if you're thinking about anybody else in a 1 QB league with the 2nd pick, then you're crazy. You've got to go with Malik Neighbors. Where it gets interesting is with the 3rd wide receiver, Rome Odunze. We know this is a fantastic class, and Odunze is the clear number 3 guy. However, he's still an excellent prospect. In fact, some teams had him above Neighbors. He's a different style of player. He's very reliable. He's got a better character that a lot of the teams liked. Plus, he's very big, 6'3". So he's excellent with contested catches. He's strong. He can create space. Doesn't create the most separation, which is a bit of a risk with an NFL player. We're seeing guys like Quentin Johnston, for example, who looked really good in college. They come into the NFL, they can't separate, and so they can't get the ball thrown to them because their quarterback's not going to rely on them. I think Caleb Williams is going to be willing to throw into tight windows enough. Plus, he's only going to get single coverage with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore there. Where he develops is a real question mark because there's so much else going on in that offense. You can't expect a lot of him year 1. For that reason, I can think of a lot of situations where it does make sense to take him after a couple of quarterbacks. In Superflex, it does get interesting when you compare him to a Drake May, for example. For that reason, I'd only be taking him 3rd overall in a 1 QB league. And even then, I think he's pretty close to Brock Bowers and pretty close to Caleb Williams. So think about what your need is. Think about whether you're going to be winning straight away. If you're not competing in the next year or two, then Adunde is a great option because he is going to be a stud for the long term. He's just got so much target competition for the next year or two that it's harder to see him succeeding. But we know he's big. We know he's strong. He's okay going deep. He's solid after the catch, and he's fantastic in the red zone. He's going to get a lot of touchdowns. So especially in non-PPR and half PPR, he becomes a good, solid option. After those first three guys, there is a pretty solid gap, but there's really good depth in this wide receiver class. This is one of the best wide receivers classes we've seen in a long time, both for top-end quality and for depth. But there's no clear number 4 option. You'll see a lot of different people saying different things. For me, Brian Thomas Jr. was number 6, although Zay Jones being released recently does move him up a little bit. But for me, he still belongs in the 6th spot. I'm a little bit nervous about a number of things for him. Firstly, we know he's big. We know he can go deep, but he's got drop issues. He's got very wooden hands. He doesn't softly catch the ball. He's an okay route runner. He's okay after the catch, but that's not really his strength. He's a little bit soft. I've got concerns, and there are reasons to believe that he's not going to be fantastic in the NFL. Plus, he goes into an offense where there's a lot of other target competition. Even with Zay Jones out, that just means he's going to be a starter. But Christian Kirk's still the number 1 guy there. And we know that Gabe Davis will be involved doing a lot of the deep stuff. But that's kind of Brian Thomas's thing as well. So I'm not really sure how that all fits in. Plus, they've still got Evan Ingram. They've got Trevor Etienne, and you know they're going to run the ball. And they've got a number of running backs who they've been bringing in so they can run the ball effectively as well. So this is going to be a really well-rounded offense, and that's not great for fantasy. You kind of want a lot of the targets filtered towards your guy, and that makes me pretty nervous about Thomas. For that reason, I've got him below this next guy, Xavier Worthy, who was a real riser during the draft process. Obviously, he ran a record 40 time, and that's very exciting. Plus, the fact he goes to the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes is excellent. We've wanted them to take a wide receiver in the first round for a long time, and they finally have. Rashee Rice is obviously in a bit of trouble. We don't really know what to expect from Marquise Brown there, so that makes Worthy very interesting. He's smaller than the other guys, but he's not tiny. We're still talking nearly 6 foot. So we're talking about a guy with truly elite speed, can go deep, but he's still solid after the catch as well. So you can check it down to him and let him make plays kind of in that Malik Neighbors mold as well. He doesn't quite have that same size as some of the big guys, so he's not going to be as good in the red zone, but they've already got Travis Kelce for that, and they do tend to use their running backs for checkdowns there. So I'd be expecting you'd be looking for volume of catches and big plays, kind of in that Tyreek Hill mold, but he's not Tyreek Hill. We're not talking about the same sort of thing. He's got better long speed. He's pretty explosive, but we are talking about a guy who's a little bit more of a deep threat and a little bit bigger than a Tyreek Hill. So it's going to be interesting to see how they use him. I like him. I've got him slightly ahead of Thomas, but if you want to take Brian Thomas because there's a little bit more upside, I totally understand that as well. Now, Ricky Pearsall went with the 31st pick to the 49ers. I don't understand this pick. I don't understand why they chose to take him here, and I personally don't understand why they didn't trade back because they could get him a lot later on as well. Pearsall wasn't the best receiver on the board. Heck, for me, he wasn't even one of the top 5 receivers on the board. He's a solid player, but we're talking about a guy who's just okay at a lot of things. He's got okay size. He's a fine route runner. He's got very good long speed, but he's not overly explosive. His hands are fine. He's a little bit skinny, a little bit weak. I don't really understand how they're going to use him. He really should be used in the slot. It's hard to see how that fits in with Deebo Samuel and Ayuk. Presumably they're going to move on for one of those two. And if they do, depending on what happens and who they bring in instead, or if they bring no one in, then he will rise up for me a little bit, but he's still clearly behind a lot of these other guys in this range. I wouldn't be thinking about taking him in Dynasty until the 2nd round. Whereas guys like Worthy and Thomas, they're clear Dynasty first-round guys in your rookie rankings. The only guys I put ahead of him are the other wide receivers I've got ranked higher, plus Brock Bowers. And you can think about a Jonathan Brooks, for example, and then obviously Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. They're the clear guys that go first. And then after that, it's all about wide receivers and what you value. But I'd certainly be taking most of these wide receivers ahead of the rest of the running backs. Trey Benson's the only one I'd even consider in that same range. Ricky Pearsall, though, he falls behind a lot of those guys, and I would be considering a lot more running backs. Probably not any other tight ends, but I'd be certainly considering Drake May in a 1 QB league ahead of him. I'd even be considering someone like JJ McCarthy if you really need a quarterback. I just don't believe in Pearsall at all. Don't love the situation. There's so much target competition. Plus, we haven't even talked about Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle either. So there's a lot to worry about. Plus, we know they like to put Juwan Jennings out there as a blocking wide receiver. They can't do that with Pistol. He's not big enough. He's not a good enough blocker. So unless they trade someone away, he's not even going to be out on the field every down. So this is more of a long-term thing. If they drop one of those other wide receivers, he's going to increase in value, but still not high enough for me. Now, Xavier Legette obviously goes in the first round, scrapes in thanks to Carolina taking him. We know he wanted to go to Carolina. He's from South Carolina. It makes sense. I personally wouldn't want to go to Carolina. That team is a mess, and they're going to be for a while Tepper's in charge. But it makes sense he'd want to go to his home team. He said he visited them 4 times, which is absolutely crazy. I don't even know how you could do that. You usually don't get that many visits, even though he's a local guy. So that's a little bit weird. But he said he wanted to go there. The team desperately wanted him. They said they wanted Worthy or Legette. So I like the fact that they've taken the guy that they wanted. That's at least a good sign. But I don't know. It's hard to see how this team's going to work. We haven't exactly seen Young be able to function in a way that really helps his wide receivers. Adam Thielen had some good times last season, but he really drifted towards the end. And they've now got Deontay Johnson in there. We know he can be a bit of a target hog, but Xavier Legette's more of a guy that you're going to use in the red zone. He's not actually that big. He's only 6'1", but he looks massive. He's really good at contested catches. He's great up the seam. He's got solid hands without being great. He's a good deep receiver. His route running and yak ability are okay, but he's really good in the red zone. So he's a guy that's just a solid big play guy, but he does have some risk because we've seen those guys who need to make contested catches have some struggles at times because it's harder to separate in the NFL. I think he's got enough speed and enough strength to make up for that, but it is a little bit of a risky one. Plus, they only brought in Jonathan Mingo last year, and while Mingo was pretty disappointing, the reality is that he's still a guy that they need to think about and they might give more opportunity. So I don't know if they phase Thielen out, if Legette's not going to be the clear starter or not. So there's clearly some risk here, but I really like the upside of a guy who's very talented and the guy who I had going in the first round early in the process because I like Legette a lot more than what I thought a lot of the teams would. Now in the second round, gosh, this frustrated me. Keon Coleman going to the Bills. I had quite a bit of money on Coleman to go in the first round at 5-1 because I thought it was pretty likely. I like Coleman a lot, and I thought there would be a team that might reach for him in that 28 to 31 region, 32 region, sorry. And the Bills would have taken him, but they traded back, which is a genius move by them because no one else took him, and they clearly had a couple of guys on the board they were willing to take. I think he's a fantastic pick for him. He's going to be that kind of number one receiver that they need. He's a true X receiver, and that's exactly what they needed for their offense. He's agile, but he's explosive. He's fantastic after the catch. He's also very strong, solid with contested catches. He doesn't have that deep speed, but they don't really need that deep speed. They've already got Khalil Shakir to do that sort of thing. Plus, they've got Curtis Samuel to do a lot of that scat back stuff. So this is just their number one guy. The main guy is taking over from Stephon Diggs. He's not identical to Stephon Diggs, but he's certainly playing that number one role. I really like this landing spot. I love him for fantasy. This is a great situation. There is some question marks about separation, which is always scary, but we're talking about a guy who's 6'3". They're going to use him in the red zone. They've got so many other guys you've got to cover with Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox if they use him out there, plus the speed of Shakir. Plus, they've obviously got their running backs, and Josh Allen's legs are always scary as well, so you can't exactly sit back against him. So this is a situation where I really like how this could look for Coleman. I think he goes into a fantastic situation. I'm taking him above every other wide receiver except for those top 3 starts. I'm probably taking him 6th or 7th overall, depending on what my needs are. Maybe 8th if you put him after Brooks, both quarterbacks, and Brock Bowers other 3 wide receivers. But he's definitely a round 1 guy for me. And you probably don't need to take him in round 1. I expect a lot of other people are going to draft him after Worthy and Thomas. I would take him first, but I'd trade back if I got the opportunity, knowing that any of those 3 guys would be good, and a lot of people aren't going to be willing to wait that long. So this is a great player for you to pick up with a little bit of value, or you can wait and see who else gets him and see if you can make a bit of a cheaper option, see if you can get a little bit of value for him there as well. He's the kind of player who can come in for those teams that have been winning in Dynasty and replace one of your aging guys and perform straight away. More than a lot of the other guys, more than even Odunze maybe, we're talking about a guy who could potentially be excellent in year 1. There is risk because of the separation issues, but I still think the skill is there. Ladd McConkey's another guy I really like. This is a good situation for him. A lot of people are saying he's going to be in the slot, and that's possible. But he played the majority of his snaps in college on the outside. So we're talking about a guy who can line up everywhere. So if they decide to slide other guys into the slot, then that's an option for him. They've already got the big-bodied guy in Quinton Johnston, although he's still having some struggles. They've got kind of the deeper guy in Josh Palmer. So now they're bringing McConkey. This is a pretty good fit to kind of replace Keenan Allen, but be able to line him up everywhere. We're talking about a guy who's a bit smaller. He's under 6 foot, but he's fast. He's very smooth route runner. He can go deep anytime, but he's also good short as well. He's got good hands, excellent after the catch ability. He's not great in the red zone, but that's not what you're going to see from the Chargers anyway. You're going to see them run the ball a lot in the red zone there anyway. The only concern is in this new offense, exactly how much are they going to pass the ball? While he's probably the number one option, although Josh Palmer will have something to say about that, I expect they're going to run the ball a lot. But you've got Justin Herbert, so you can't exactly not use him at all. They're going to have to pass the ball. Plus, their defense kind of sucks. So you'd have to think they're going to have to throw to stay in games at times as well. So it's hard to know exactly what to expect from McConkey. But for me, I like him more than a lot of the other options. I like him slightly more than Xavier Legette, simply because there's a better offense for him to work in. And I feel like he's got some skills that kind of suit the situation he's going into. But he and Legette are very close for me. I would happily take him anywhere late first round, probably in dynasty drafts, but you're probably going to see him fall to the early second. And if he does, I'll be doing everything I can to make sure I can grab him, because he's another guy who could be real quality for your dynasty team. Now, Jalen Polk's another guy who's going to be really interesting. We're talking about a talented receiver who goes to a really awkward situation. We don't know what the Patriots are going to look like this year. Whether they've got Jacoby Brissett or Drake May, it's probably going to be a little bit ugly. They don't have Bill Belichick there anymore, but I wouldn't expect it to be a massively different offense. They don't suddenly have really good weapons. They're still going to struggle. It's going to be a whole heap of random wide receivers each week. We saw Kendrick Bourne have big blow-up weeks and then suck half the time. We saw Demario Douglas have some big weeks when they just wanted to check down a lot. We saw Hunter Henry randomly have boom weeks and score a lot of touchdowns. They try to run the ball, but that's not really working for them anymore with their defense taking a step back, and they're not leading a lot of games. So it's hard to know exactly what to expect from Jalen Polk. I'm a little bit nervous about him, but there is at least enough quality there with him that I can see situations where he could be good, but he's a guy that you wouldn't expect a lot of from year one. He's more going to be in that wide receiver 3 range early on, but I feel like he's someone who could rise up and become a true wide receiver 1 in the future, because he does have those skills. We're talking about a really good route runner, my Australian came in for a second. Really good route runner, great hands, excellent at tracking the ball downfield and making big plays, which also makes him solid in the red zone. He's strong. He's good after the catch. Where he's going to struggle a little bit is that he's a lazy blocker. And that's a bit of an issue, because you'd imagine there are going to be situations where the Patriots are going to run the ball quite a lot on early downs. Whether they can have him out there on running plays, I don't know. And that's a little bit scary for me. That's what moves him below a lot of the guys who were drafted just before him, is the fact that we don't know exactly how he's going to be used. It's an iffy offense, and we don't know that he's going to be out there the whole time. Having said that, he is good enough to get deep, and that can sometimes, that explosiveness and that ability to get off the line quickly can be helpful in running plays, because you're getting the defense going in the wrong direction. So there are at least some positives there, but I'm a little bit nervous about him for that reason. Now, Adonai Mitchell is another guy with a lot of upside. There's so many wide receivers with upside in this class. There's 11 guys I would happily take and consider to be a positive starter in my dynasty team as one of my main guys in a 12-team league. That's how deep this wide receiver class is. Mitchell was someone expected to go in the early rounds at one stage, but there are a lot of teams concerned about his character, teams concerned about his ability to manage his diabetes, which is a real issue. We've seen some players with diabetes go great because they manage it very well, but others can just be very sluggish on certain games because they're not able to get the right amount of sugar into their system to be able to play. So whether Mitchell's able to do that or not, we don't know. We know the Colts are willing to take risks on players, and that's what they've done here. And I think it's a fantastic pick. He's probably the first guy that goes into a situation where we can really say very clearly he is the second guy here, and he probably will be for some time. Maybe he alongside Ricky Pearsall are the only guys where we're like, well, this guy's clearly the number 2 here. I can't imagine him being above Michael Pittman. They've paid Pittman a reasonable amount of money. So I think that Mitchell's probably the number 2 guy, but he does have upside. They needed to replace Alec Pierce, who really hasn't worked out. He was just a guy for a lot of the time. And Josh Downs is just a small slot guy. So it makes sense to bring Mitchell in. This is fantastic value for them here. A guy who could have been in the first round on talent, but drifts because of other concerns. Excuse me. So this is a guy who's very interesting for Dynasty. There's a lot more upside here than someone like Polk, and there's way more upside than Pearsall. So he's someone you could easily take ahead of those guys. And it wouldn't be crazy to take him ahead of Xavier Legette as well, depending on what situation you're going into. You need to understand that he's going into an offense that does want to run the ball a lot with Jonathan Taylor. They still have Michael Pittman as the main guy, and Anthony Richardson, we don't really know how they're going to use him exactly. So there is some risk here, but there's not a lot of other passing options here. Their tight ends are all, I mean, there's many of them. There's like 9 of them, but they're all pretty average. We haven't really seen any of them break out. We thought they might take Brock Bowers, but they obviously chose to go for Latu instead, which is fantastic value, and took Mitchell here. And I think it makes sense. I think it's a situation where there's upside there. He needs some development. He's got good side, but a lot of drops. Not great with the ball in his hands after the ball. You're better off kind of getting him down the field and then getting the ball to him, because he's so good deep. He's only average in the red zone. He's not the greatest route runner. So there's definitely some downside, but there's plenty of upside here as well. Now, this is where the drop-off happens. And you can see that happening in the picks, where we hit the third round, and all of a sudden we're talking about guys that are going to need a lot more development, or that come with a lot of risk. Malaki Corley is the guy that came off the board next to the Jets. The Jets really wanted a wide receiver in the first round, and we're interested in Rome Odunze. I think they were a little bit surprised probably when the Bears took him there. I think a lot of people were expecting the Bears to trade down potentially, and I'm surprised the Jets didn't try to move up. Their number one plan was to try to move down and take another receiver like Michael Thomas, according to Charlie Campbell, who's very in with the Jets. The number 2 plan was to take Odunze, and the number 3 plan was to take Brock Bowers. They went with plan D. I don't understand why they went offensive tackle. It didn't make any sense. They don't need that right now, and their win window is only the next year or two while Aaron Rodgers is around. They don't have a clear backup for him. So Corley is a guy that can probably perform straight away. It's going to be interesting to see how Mike Williams goes. We haven't really seen the Jets use a second wide receiver very effectively. It's been Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, and a very undiluted offense, mostly going to those 2 guys. They need to get to the balls to these other guys a little bit more. Mike Williams is a guy they can certainly use, but Corley can come in and do a very different job. He's a little bit smaller. He's a bit chunky and solid. He's a solid blocker for that reason, but he ran a very simple route tree at college, and that makes him a little bit scary. He might need a little bit of development, and that means we might not see much of him in the first season, or only see him in very simple situations. He's got good hands, and he's good after the catch, so you can just get him the ball early and then let him run, and I think that's going to be a little bit useful, because for right now, his route running does need some development. For that reason, and the fact that they don't tend to use their second, and certainly not their third wide receiver a lot. Think about who their third wide receiver last year is. You probably don't even know. It would have been Alan Lazard. It might have been Xavier Gibson. Who knows? It kind of changed during the season, and I have no idea who it's going to be this season, but it's probably got to be Corley, and that's a little bit scary to know how he'll get used. Jermaine Burton, on the other hand, goes into a far clearer situation. He goes into a situation where he's the clear wide receiver 3. And we know the wide receiver 3 for the Bengals has a lot of value. It's been Tyler Boyd in the past. I don't know that Burton's going to go into that same role. We might see Trent Irwin come in and take some touches, especially on running downs, but they can't really afford to pay T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. So I feel like Burton's kind of going to be groomed as that guy who can come into that spot. But there's a massive amount of risk with Burton. We're talking a guy with first-round talent, but the character concerns were so serious that we saw him drop into the mid-third round. And that's a lot for a wide receiver with his talent. So there is a possibility he's just a total bust. But on the field, we're talking about a guy who's strong and fast, good size, can make big plays, but was underused a little bit in college. I think possibly to an extent that was because a lot of the times he just wasn't prepared for games. So we'll see how he goes in the NFL. He could totally bust, and that is very, very possible, but there's at least a lot of boom upside there as well. For that reason, I do like the idea of taking a pot shot on him late second round, probably early third round in dynasty leagues. You might even be able to get him later on. These guys are going to start falling because people are going to think, gosh, haven't been a lot of running backs taken. Better take some running backs. Realistically, there's only 2 or 3 running backs who belong in the first 2 or 3 rounds in dynasty leagues. So you're going to see these wide receivers start to fall if people get desperate and need to take running backs and tight ends simply because they think that the value is there. It's not. keep taking wide receivers. This is a year for wide receivers. Next year, great running backs, great tight ends, lots of options. This year, it's all about the wide receivers. You have to take the wide receivers. That's what this class is, wide receivers and quarterbacks. So make sure you're taking the value when it falls to you, because it's definitely going to fall to you. Speaking of value, the Steelers doing what the Steelers do. They're so good at finding day 2 wide receivers, and they found one here in Roman Wilson. This is a guy I love. For me, he's really actually not that far from Ricky Pearsall, which is a hilarious thing to say, given Pearsall went in the first round. But we're talking about a guy who goes into an offense that has been able to develop wide receivers really effectively. He takes over from Deontay Johnson. We know that's a valuable role. George Pickens is their number 1 guy, but he doesn't get a lot of targets. He makes big plays. So Wilson could come in and be that guy. We're talking about a slightly smaller guy, but he's got good speed and quickness. He's a good route runner. He's a guy you can get to the ball to and let him make plays. Pickens will go deep. Wilson can stay in short and suck up a lot of targets, and that's great for Dynasty and great for PPR in particular. Their third wide receiver at the moment is probably Van Jefferson, and he has always been a guy who's more of a blocker and an empty route runner than a guy that's going to get a lot of targets. So that's excellent for the fact that Wilson becomes that second wide receiver in a team that realistically doesn't use Pat Freiermuth as much as they could and will lean on the run a lot. This means that their receivers are going to be filtered to their targets are going to be filtered to these same 2 receivers a lot of the time. That gives Wilson a lot of upside. So I like the idea of taking Roman Wilson in that same area as I was talking about Burton, kind of very late second round, early third round, wherever the value is there. They'll probably fall to the mid to late third round. And if they're there, I'll do everything I can to make sure I can pick them up. Jalen McMillan also has a little bit of value, but there's a lot more risk here. We're talking about a guy who is promising. He's got good height, but he's very skinny, and that's very scary in the NFL. He's probably going to play in the slot, and that's really Chris Godwin's role at the moment. So it might be that he doesn't see the field too much, and the kind of cycles with Trey Palmer and the other guys they've got there. So it will be interesting to see how they use him. His speed's okay, but he doesn't do anything particularly well. That's not a major issue if you're going to get targets and going to get them consistently. And I don't think that's going to happen in the first season or 2. But once Mike Evans and Chris Godwin move on, realistically, there is an opportunity to step into that role. And I can imagine Jalen McMillan doing that. So I like the upside here. It's a positive situation. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with him. But I do at least like the upside of taking him in the 4th round of your dynasty drafts, because I do feel like there's something you can do with him there. Luke McCaffrey, very familiar name, obviously brother of Christian McCaffrey. He goes into a solid situation with the Commanders. Obviously, they've got a good new quarterback in Jaden Daniels. Usually you avoid rookie quarterbacks, and the fact he's going to use his legs a lot means there are going to be less targets available. But Jahan Dotson has been a big question mark. He's kind of been a little bit of a bust given how early he was drafted. Terry McLaurin is a guy that they're probably going to be able to use, but Jaden Daniels, while he's good downfield, does tend to be a little bit overly safe with the ball, and that means he's less likely to risk it with McLaurin than maybe he should. That's going to open up some targets underneath, and I feel like McCaffrey could suck some of them up. He's got really good size, good speed, very versatile. They can use him all over the place. He's really just quite a nice replacement for Curtis Samuel, honestly. He's similar style, good yak. Very, very inexperienced. He was a quarterback initially and really only developed into a wide receiver recently. He gets caught on the line of scrimmage a lot, which is a bit of a scary thing because he is quite skinny and a little bit weak. So he needs to bulk up a little bit for the NFL. We know that family can do that. We've seen it with his brother and father. So there's no reason to think that won't happen. But he's certainly someone that I wouldn't be expecting a lot of in the first year or 2, but he might surprise you. He's the kind of guy that I think some people will probably take a late pot shot on in later rounds of dynasty and redraft drafts because they see the name and they think that's cool. So don't get caught up and reach for him because of that. There's so many other wide receiver options here. The reality is that by the time we get down to here, some of these guys aren't even going to be drafted in a standard 4-round dynasty rookie draft. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, but he's a guy you can take a very late 4th rounder on and feel good about that. Speaking about guys who you can take pot shots on, Troy Franklin is a guy we thought was going to go so much earlier. A lot of people love this situation for him. I don't really see it. I don't think anyone really wants to be playing for the Broncos at the moment. They're looking like a little bit of a hot mess team at the moment. We don't know who their quarterback's going to be, but their options are Bo Nix, Zach Wilson, and Jarrett Stidham. None of those seem like great options to me. Plus, they've got so many wide receivers. Cortland Sutton's clearly the number one guy. Obviously, they've lost Jerry Jeudy, but he wasn't offering them much in the first place. Marvin Mims is a guy they're expecting to kind of break out. They've got Josh Reynolds as well, but I mean, there's not much value there. We've seen Reynolds do a lot, but because of all those players, plus Tim Patrick comes back from injury as well, there's so many other guys to worry about that I'm not even sure that Franklin's going to be seeing the field regularly in the first couple of years. We know this is something that Jordan Payton sometimes does, so Franklin is a little bit scary for me. I do think there's more talent there than a Luke McCaffrey, just pure talent, because he's got that solid size-speed ratio. It's positive, but again, he's a little bit skinny. It's hard to know exactly how they're going to use him. He's a scary one for me. So he and McCaffrey, you can take a pot shot, but I wouldn't certainly be going out of my way to draft them. Now, everyone after this, we're talking about deep dynasty leagues or guys that you can take very late shots on in redraft in certain situations. Javon Baker was the next guy to go. He goes to the Patriots. Don't really understand what the Patriots are doing here. This was a little bit of a reach for Baker in the first place. He takes on a role that they already kind of have guys that can do, or they've certainly tried to bring in guys who can do it. The Patriots have a long history of busting on wide receivers. Think N'Keal Harry, think Tyquan Thornton, think Kayshon Boutte, for example. Obviously, they've brought in Juju Smith-Schuster and somehow broken him. They've also got KJ Osborne in there. So the guys that work in this Patriots system tend to be different guys to what you usually expect. Think Jacoby Myers and stuff like that. So while Polk is the clear number one guy there, it's hard to even know if he's going to succeed. And they've got so many other options behind him. Osborne coming is the real scary one for me. I don't think Juju's going anywhere. He's still going to get little opportunities here and there. He's not exactly a special teams guy. So I don't understand how Baker fits in. He's got excellent long speed, but he's not particularly agile or explosive. He's pretty weak. He's okay after the catch, but I just don't understand exactly what they're doing here. He's a guy that I'm not touching in Dynasty. Someone else can worry about him and waste their time. Now, Tez Walker is a guy who I am a little bit more interested in, but this is more of a situational thing. We expected the Ravens to take a wide receiver a little bit earlier than this. Obviously, Odell Beckham Jr. is out. They struggled to really get Rashad Bateman going last season. After Zay Flowers broke out, it was more just kind of like rotational guys with Nelson Aguilar in there as well. They did use all four of their wide receivers, a surprising amount, and Tez Walker goes in as the probable fourth wide receiver. And that's interesting, at least, especially if he can break out and become a clear number two, because neither Bateman or Aguilar looked like taking on that role clearly. Walker's a real risky guy. There was talk about him in the second or third round at one stage, but when you really dig deep into it, there's a lot of drop issues, really serious drop issues. So there's a major bust potential here. But on the outside, there's a lot of upside there as well. There's great speed, good size as well. He makes a lot of big plays. So if he can get his hands right and develop well, he's a guy that in a couple of seasons could be very well. We know the Ravens are very good at drafting good upside players and good value players as well. And clearly they've seen something in Walker here, and I do like the pick compared to a lot of the other options available. So it could be that Walker is very good. We'll have to wait and see. He's someone I'd take a late shot on in Dynasty. Not so much redraft. I really just don't see it being a high-value situation there at the moment, especially with Mark Andrews still there, and they're still going to want to run the ball, and they've got Zay Flowers breaking out. But we might see that Walker is someone who develops into a clear wide receiver too for them over the next couple of years, and that's going to have some value. Now, the 49ers have gone back to the well and gone for another wide receiver here. Not exactly sure why. I don't know that this situation really makes sense. They already went for Pearsall, which was a okay pick. I think it kind of made sense for them to take one, but then they've gone back and gotten another one here. You have to feel like this is a situation where they're thinking special teams. I think that Cowan could be a guy who's quite good on at kick returns, and we're going to see kick return value really increase here, especially because in this draft, there's a lot of players after the fourth or fifth round that are quite weak compared to what we usually see, because less players went into the draft, and a lot more players are using their fourth, fifth, 6 years of eligibility because of the ability to use the transfer portal, because of those COVID years, because of a heap of other issues as well, the NIL stuff as well. So because of all that stuff combining, I think we're probably going to see a lot more kick returners in this range and a lot less high-quality players. Having said that, this is a great wide receiver class, so some of these players just fell because there's so many other good players ahead of them. So this is probably the one exception where you are going to see a little bit of quality in the later rounds. Cowing is a guy that's good, especially if you're in a situation where you've got points for kick returns, like good solid amounts of points for kick returns. He's someone that might be useful there. He's only 5'8", very fast and shifty. Could come in and do some after the catch stuff, but because of that size, you're not talking about a guy who's going to be a star every down player. And for that reason, I'm not overly interested in him. The same applies for Anthony Gould as the Colts go in and get another wide receiver. And again, this feels like a kick return situation. He's very much a special teams guy, small slot guy, very, very, very fast, but probably just kick returns. Anais Smith, another guy who's small, 5'9", but really good after the catch. He's someone that could offer something here. I think he's probably, again, a special teams guy. A lot of these later round guys will ultimately be special teams guy, but we know after Brown and Smith, the Eagles don't really have a lot. Their third wide receiver is kind of a mix of Quez Watkins, Julio Jones, and Olamide Zaccheaus last season. They've brought in Paris Campbell, who really struggled to get game time with the Giants, and they brought in Devontae Parker, who struggled as well last season as well with the Pats. So it's hard to know exactly what to expect from Smith, but there's at least an opportunity to become the third wide receiver. It's not overly valuable there, but if the Eagles can start to do something with a position, Smith might provide some value. For that reason, I like him better than a Gould. And at least he has a little bit of upside there. Probably only taking him in really deep dynasty leagues. We're talking about like ones where you roster a lot of players or ones where you got 16-plus teams. Jamari Thrash goes into a similar situation, but he's a very different type of player. We're talking about a guy who's very versatile, solid across the board, okay size, just a little under 6 foot. Isn't really going to be that same sort of kick returner, isn't particularly explosive. And he goes into a depth chart with a lot of players who have busted. Obviously, Amari Cooper is the main guy there. Jerry Jeudy comes in, and who knows what to expect from him. Elijah Moore, there was a lot of hope for him last season as their second wide receiver. That didn't really happen after he was solid for the Jets. Cedric Tillman hasn't proven to be the guy either. They brought in David Bell. He was really disappointing as well. We've seen them use Woods. They've got Prochet in there. They've got a million guys. It's hard to know how Thrash fits in. It's entirely possible he doesn't even make the roster. But there's a little bit of upside there. And for that reason, I don't mind him. My favorite late round guy, though, certainly my favorite fifth round or later guy is Bob Means, mainly because of this situation. He's a fine player. I don't mind him. He's 6'1", which is good size. He's got solid speed. A little bit concerned about separation issues, but when you're talking about a guy who you took in the fifth round, I mean, there's clearly upside there. At the moment, the third wide receiver for the Saints seems like it could be A.T. Perry, might be Cedric Wilson. We'll have to wait and see what happens there. Regardless, we're talking about a situation where the depth chart is very weak. Behind Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, I can barely say his name. Rashid Shaheed is not really a guy that I'd want to be leaning on as my second wide receiver. So there's opportunities there. We saw that Perry was, I think, a 6th-round pick last year and ended up getting quite a lot of snaps. Possible that Bub Means is able to do the same thing and take an opportunity here. Clearly, the Saints are just going for something and seeing what works. I feel like there's upside there. So I like the idea of taking a shot on Means. Jaquan Jackson, I'm not really particularly excited about him. He's probably a slot guy. They've already got Kyle Phillips, who was good before he got injured. They're cycling a heap of other guys. It's mainly DeAndre Hopkins. Calvin Ridley can't be there for very long, I don't think. I feel like this is going to be a rebuild within the next couple of seasons for the Titans. They've tried to at least give some weapons to Will Levis, and I like what they're doing there, but Treylon Burks has been a bit of a bust. They keep using Nick Westbrook-Akine and guys like that. Even Colton Dow gets on the field quite a lot of the time. So there's opportunities for guys to get on, but they're not going to be fantasy relevant. That really kills their value. So not particularly interested in Jackson. The guy I'm interested in coming next, though, and that's Malik Washington. This is definitively my favorite late round guy. I really like what he can offer. He's probably my favorite player since Tez Walker, who was like early 4th round. We're talking about a guy who slips in behind Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle into a depth chart that's pretty much empty. Braxton Berrios is the slot guy, but they only use him on certain downs. They got River Craycraft, who's meh. He's played that same role for the 49ers and now the Dolphins, and it's nothing special. It's not really fantasy relevant. Ezu Kanwa was really disappointing for them, so he's probably not going to be involved at all. We've got a situation where they've got an extremely fast player, because it's the Dolphins, coming in and potentially being the wide receiver 3 on an explosive offense in a situation where Tyreek Hill realistically has only got a couple of years left. He said he wants to retire soon. So we're talking about a player who could come in and make an immediate impact. For that reason, I really like the idea of taking Malik Washington very, very late in dynasty drafts and possibly even very late in redraft, though I'm less interested in him there. We're talking about a couple of years down the road as someone who provides quite a bit of value, especially if you're in a slightly deeper league, 14 teams, 16 teams, maybe more. I'm in a couple of 32-team leagues. I'll be targeting him there, for example. He's someone who at least provides some upside and potential to be a fantasy starter. Johnny Wilson is another guy that people have said that about. I don't agree. People are saying he fell. This is about where I expected him to go. I feel like he's a late day 3 kind of guy, and that's exactly as it turned out. Talking about a guy who's huge but can't even catch the ball properly, he probably really needs to be a tight end. He's got okay speed. Think, I don't know, Devin Funchess, Kelvin Benjamin's probably a better comp. Just a guy who's going to be that big guy. We've seen a lot of those guys come in and they struggle and they end up transitioning to tight end, but they can't block particularly well, so they rarely get used. There have been quite a few guys like that come through recently. I feel like Johnny Wilson goes into that same area. He's a guy I'm not really particularly interested in. Same thing with Casey Washington. The Falcons finally actually have some players, which is fantastic. Especially some receivers. They brought in Mooney. They brought in Moore. I like what they're doing there. They still got Hodges, the blocking guy. They brought in Ray McLeod. Probably is most of a returning guy, but I feel like he's also going to be ahead of Washington on the depth chart. Not interested in Washington at all. There's nothing to look at here. Same thing with Taywan Palmer. This is a bit of a dud pick. Don't really understand what the Cardinals are doing here. I don't see this at all. They've got a heap of just guys at the end of their depth chart, and I feel like he's probably going to fall in behind most of them. I don't like this at all. Another guy not particularly interested in is Jordan Whittington. We know that the Rams have a lot of options there. Obviously, Cooper Kupp's been around for a while. Puka Nacua broke out last year. Robinson was fantastic last year, plus they got a little bit of out of Tutu Atwell finally as well. So there's some upside there for those players. But Whittington falls in way below them. He's probably below Ben Skoranek. We know they love him there. They've got some other guys as well. He's at best a backup. I just don't see this happening at all. A guy who's not at best a backup that I could actually see being the wide receiver 3 is Ryan Flournoy. This is a situation where the wide receiver 3 spot is pretty open. We saw Jalen Tolbert kind of fight with Michael Gallup last season for it. Ultimately, they kind of split it towards the end of the season. Tolbert really isn't an every down guy, and that's going to give someone else some opportunities. It might be that they use Turpin, though I feel like he's more of a guy that they bring on for a couple of snaps with some end arounds and things like that. More as like a scat back kind of option nearly, because realistically he's just there as a kick returner and a special teams guy. That really opens the depth chart up. The guy they've got next is Brooks, and Jalen Brooks is a 7th round guy who hasn't really done anything at all. So these guys are going to get opportunities, and it's possible that this opportunity leads to something. It probably won't, but there's at least better upside than a lot of the other guys going in this range. Speaking of upside, Brendan Rice, famous name, and for the same reason, because we're talking about the same family. We're talking about a guy who I expected to go way earlier than this. 6'2", really good size, good strength, great route runner, good with contested catches. I'm surprised he didn't go 5th. Even 4th round, I think, would have been fine for him. I'm a little bit confused why he fell, and I'll be interested to see what Charlie Campbell has to say on Walter Football about that. I hope he looks into Rice, because this is a really interesting one here. There are opportunities here. We've seen Quinton Johnston has been a little bit of a bust. Josh Palmer, no one set on. Obviously, they brought in McConkey. Darius Davis is more of a special teams guy, but he's now the wide receiver 4. So if there's an injury, it's not impossible that Brendan Rice will get involved. They also took another wide receiver in Cornelius Johnson after that. He's another interesting guy, but I feel like Rice is the main guy I'm interested in here. But one of those 7th round guys could turn out to be of a little bit of value, and that's really interesting. Speaking of 7th round guys in weird situations, Taj Washington's another guy that kind of falls into that Malik Washington's role of being a guy who goes into a team with a weak depth chart. We're talking about a guy who's a little bit smaller. Obviously, he's fast because he went to the Dolphins. He's going to probably play in the slot. So he's kind of competing with Braxton Berrios there. I feel like he's clearly behind Malik Washington, but there's at least a little bit of upside here. So either of those Washingtons could end up being pretty good. The guy skipped over there was Devon Vele. Reason for that, I'm not particularly interested in. He doesn't particularly offer anything. He's big. He's 6'4". That's great. But honestly, I don't really know what he's going to offer the team. So I'm a little bit concerned about how we see him perform and what he's going to do. I think he's probably not going to make the roster realistically. So we're talking about a guy that you probably don't need to think about in fantasy. Now, obviously, if you've got questions, make sure you hit me up either on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. You can ask me a question on Instagram. I answer all your questions on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down. Also, check out our website, ffdfantasyfootball.com. Plus, of course, you can like and subscribe to this video. I'll be back within a couple of days to talk about the tight ends. And there is some tight end value here. It's not just Brock Bowers. I really like the number 2 guy. I just haven't told you who it was, and it was not the second tight end, drafted. So look out for that, and make sure you subscribe to make sure that you check out their next video. I'm Ben Wasley. This has been the Fantasy First Down. Good luck.